Okay, check out this picture. It's a bird's eye view of this street intersection in India, and it's been totally transformed, like with these really bold, colorful patterns painted right on the road.
Yeah, it's striking, isn't it? Really makes you look twice.
It does. And, speaking of things that make you think, consider those everyday frustrations we all have in cities. We saw this word cloud from our
Oh,
sources,
yeah, I remember that.
and it spelled out things like congestion, no safety, dirty, no seating. These aren't just, random gripes. They're real problems people deal with.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that those visual changes, like the painted street and those very real frustrations, they're really at the core of what we're digging into today. Tactical urbanism.
Tactical urbanism, okay.
Yeah, you can think of it as sort of urban trial and error. So instead of these huge, permanent, expensive projects, cities are using small, temporary changes to test ideas, see what actually works before committing big time.
So using paint, maybe some planters, temporary barriers.
Exactly. Things like that. Quick ways to reshape how we use streets and public spaces.
Okay, let's unpack this because it's not just some random trend, right? For this deep dive, we've got a really solid source, the Tactical Urbanism Guidebook. And
Mhm.
this isn't some niche thing. It's from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs in India, working with GIZ, the German Development Agency.
Right. Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit.
Yes, them. And what's really interesting is who the guidebook is for. It says it's for citizens, experts, and the local city bodies. So everyone involved.
That's such a key point. It's not top-down. The guidebook really pushes this idea of empowering communities, getting collaboration going from the ground up.
So our mission today is really to explore the main ideas, the practical steps laid out in this guide, understand how this approach is being used specifically in Indian cities to make places more livable, more equitable, all based on this guide.
Exactly. We're looking at how they're putting these ideas into practice.
So practically speaking, what is tactical urbanism? We're talking temporary changes, but what does that actually look like on the ground?
Well, at its heart, it's about making these quick, often reversible changes to the urban environment. The interventions themselves are usually pretty low cost,
Okay.
and they're designed specifically to test out if potential long-term improvements are actually a good idea, how they work in reality. So imagine using, I don't know, brightly colored paint to mark out a temporary bike lane,
Right, I've seen things like that.
or maybe putting some planters down to narrow a street, slow traffic down. Those are the kinds of actions relatively quick to do, and you can tweak them or even remove them if they're not working out.
Right, so it's kind of like running a pilot program for urban design. But
Yeah.
why? Why go through this testing phase? What are the real upsides?
Oh, there are some really big advantages. First off, it's just a super effective way to see how people, the community, will actually react to a change
Yeah.
before you sink a ton of money into something permanent.
Okay, gauge the buy-in.
Exactly. You see how people use the space if they like the new setup.
Yeah.
And secondly, if a tactical project shows clear benefits, like people feel safer or traffic flows better,
Yeah.
it can actually speed up getting the permanent version approved and built.
Yeah.
You've already got proof it works in the real world.
That makes perfect sense. It's like, look, we tried it, people liked it, it worked, demonstrating the value.
Precisely. Plus, it lets cities tackle those user experience problems, safety issues, navigation difficulties much faster and, frankly, cheaper.
Right. No need for years of planning for a small fix.
Exactly. Instead of waiting ages for major construction, you can put in a temporary fix, say, for pedestrian safety, and see improvements almost immediately. And another big thing is collaboration.
How so?
Well, it naturally brings people together. Residents, local shop owners, maybe nonprofits, city departments. They all get a chance to work together on it.
Yeah.
There's a real sense of shared ownership. And maybe most importantly, it really boosts public engagement. It creates, better conversations between the people living there and the city officials about what they want their neighborhood to look like.
Okay, so collaborative, relatively low risk,
Hmm?
a way to experiment and improve cities. Now, the guidebook you mentioned has two main parts, people and processes and thematic interventions. Let's start with people and processes. How does one of these projects actually, kick off?
Right. So the guidebook lays out 4 main stages. The very first one is site selection.
Site selection, okay.
And this isn't just picking a street at random. There are pretty specific things they look for to give the project the best chance of success.
Like what makes a spot good for this kind of thing?
Well, the guide talks about favorable, acceptable, and not so favorable sites. Favorable ones often have A good mix of activity, think commercial buildings, maybe a school or college nearby, other public buildings.
Places with foot traffic?
Exactly. Places with people, with different needs. The street layout matters too. A loop, or a defined stretch, is often better than, say, just a random section of a really long highway. Intersections are often good candidates too, because that's where you frequently have conflicts between pedestrians and vehicles that need sorting out.
Makes sense.
And then there are practical things, like what's the road surface like? Are there sidewalks? Is there construction already happening? Ideally, you want a reasonably okay surface, some kind of sidewalk, even if it needs improving, and not too many existing obstacles where people need to walk.
And you mentioned public buildings or schools?
Yeah, being near public buildings can help with visibility, maybe getting officials on board. And near schools or colleges, well, that lets you focus on making things safer and easier for students, which is often a priority.
Okay, so choose a spot with potential, but also be realistic about what's already there.
Yeah.
Got it. So once a site is picked, what's next?
The next really vital stage is site context appraisal. This is where they dig really deep to understand the chosen location. It involves a whole battery of different mappings and surveys.
Wow, okay. Sounds like a lot of groundwork. What exactly are they mapping and surveying?
It is quite thorough. They often start with something called a total station survey that's for getting very precise measurements of the existing physical layout. But crucially, they do a pre-implementation user survey.
Before they change anything.
Yes, to get a baseline. How do people currently feel about the street? How safe do they feel walking there? How easy is it to navigate? They ask specific questions about that.
Okay.
Then they map the physical form, building heights, setbacks. Activity mapping is fascinating. They literally observe and record how people use the space. Are they standing, waiting, sitting down? Are kids playing? Are there street vendors?
So watching the actual human behavior.
Exactly. And they even do age and gender mapping. They'll go out at different times, morning, afternoon, evening, and record who's using the street children, adults, seniors, male, female.
That detail.
Oh, yes. Because it's not just about the physical space. It's about understanding its social life. Who uses it, when, why, how they feel there. This gives you so much more insight than just, say, counting cars. It means the changes you make can really respond to what people need.
That's really insightful, seeing the actual patterns. What else do they look at?
Well, there's socioeconomic activity mapping, looking at the existing greenery and tree cover, super important for shade and comfort. Then a detailed traffic study. This includes pedestrian counts, vehicle counts, often done in like 10-minute bursts every hour to see the flow through the day.
And parking, that's always a big one.
Definitely. Parking occupancy studies where loading, unloading happens. They also measure traffic speeds, sometimes with speed guns or even just phone apps. And more user surveys focusing on accessibility, how people arrive, why they're there, and again, safety perceptions.
It's like building a complete dossier on the street. What about, say, buses or auto rickshaws?
Good question. Yes, they look closely at bus stop issues and preferences. Sometimes using those word clouds you mentioned earlier to see what people complain about. Maybe safety, comfort, lack of shelter, poor signage. They also map paratransit hubs, auto stands, designated pickup drop-off spots,
Okay.
and environmental factors too. Shade patterns throughout the day, where is it shady, when. Lighting, are there dark spots, unsafe areas at night. They check existing signage to make sure new stuff doesn't clash or confuse people, map the vendors, who they are, what they sell, when they're busiest. And finally, a really thorough user group analysis,
Meaning?
identifying who the key stakeholders are. Primary users, like maybe students if it's near a school, or shoppers. Secondary users, like transit riders or delivery drivers. Tertiary users, maybe nearby residents who pass through. Understanding all these different groups. Oh, and comfort surveys. How does the weather impact how people feel on that street? Often using simple rating scales.
So they can tailor interventions if it shows, say, elderly women feel unsafe at dusk.
Precisely. If the data highlights specific needs for certain groups or at certain times, the tactical changes can directly address those. It's incredibly data-driven.
That is an amazing amount of information gathering. So once they have all this data, what's the next move?
That brings us to stage 3, design and preparation for implementation. This is where all that data feeds directly into creating the conceptual design for the temporary changes.
Okay, the creative part starts.
Yes, but it's grounded in the data. And they also have to consider relevant design standards, like from the Indian Roads Congress, IRC, or DUDAPEC, to make sure the ideas are safe and sound, even if temporary.
Right, standards still apply.
Absolutely. Then they prepare detailed designs, figure out the costs, get the necessary approvals from city agencies. That's crucial. procure the materials, the paint, the cones, the planters, whatever's needed. And importantly, they also prepare the post-implementation surveys and any community engagement materials at this stage.
Ah, smart. Planning how to measure success right from the design phase, building in that feedback loop,
Exactly. They're thinking about evaluation from the get-go.
and the final stage, putting it all in place.
Right. Stage 4 is implementation and post-implementation evaluation. This involves a detailed work plan, lots of coordination with different city departments, sanitation, traffic police, maybe public works.
Needs cooperation.
Definitely.
Yeah.
A traffic management plan is usually needed, worked out with the traffic police, especially if you need to close a lane or divert traffic temporarily. Then you organize the workers' municipal crews or maybe volunteers,
Mm-hmm.
prep the site, clean it, maybe level rough spots, and then execute the plan. Painting, placing barriers, installing temporary seating, whatever the design calls for.
And then the evaluation part.
Yes.
Yes.
As soon as it's implemented, they start collecting those user responses using the surveys they prepared. They take lots of photos and videos for documentation. And based on the feedback, the observations, the data they collect after the change, they develop recommendations for whether a permanent design makes sense and what it might look like.
It sounds really systematic, actually. Very thorough, even for temporary stuff. Now, the guidebook also mentioned 5 key roles. Who are the essential people needed to make one of these projects happen?
Yeah, it breaks it down nicely. First, there's initiation and championing. That's the person or group who sparks the idea and really pushes it forward.
The driving force.
Exactly. Then design and construction, the folks with the technical skills to draw up the plans and oversee the physical work. Coordination and logistics is vital. Someone has to manage all the moving parts, keep everyone talking to each other.
The organizer.
Communications and documentation is key for keeping the public in the loop and recording everything, the process, the data, the outcomes. And finally, funding, fundraising. Someone's got to find the money, even if it's low cost.
Okay, those roles cover all the bases. Now, the other major part of the guidebook was thematic interventions. We saw that painted intersection earlier. Is that a thematic intervention?
It definitely fits the mold. While the excerpts we looked at didn't list all the examples from that chapter, the guidebook does talk about 5 main thematic areas for interventions. That painted intersection, that's using visual cues, surface treatments to change how people perceive and use the space. That's classic tactical urbanism.
Right.
And the guide actually shows sample street sections, like an 18-meter wide street showing the before and then maybe 2 different after tactical designs, proposed section 1, proposed section 2.
Oh, showing options.
Yeah, showing how you could temporarily reallocate space differently, maybe wider sidewalks in one, a cycle lane in another, different parking arrangements. It visualizes the possibilities.
So besides painted intersections, what other kinds of things might fall under these thematic interventions?
Oh, lots of things. You might see temporary pedestrian plazas where maybe they close a block to cars for a weekend and put out chairs and plants, or pop-up bike lanes using cones or temporary barriers just to test the demand. Parklets are another common one. Converting a couple of parking spots into tiny public spaces with seating or greenery. It's all about creatively rethinking how existing space is used, even for a short time.
That really helps paint a picture. And the guide mentioned a material palette. What sort of stuff do they typically use?
Yeah, the focus is definitely on low-cost, readily available materials. Things like acrylic cis-temper paint, cheaper than road marking paint, traffic cones, flexible posts, maybe nylon ropes to define areas. Wooden pallets are popular. You can repurpose them for seating or planters pretty easily. And for shade, maybe simple structures using bamboo or fabric.
Resourceful.
Totally. The idea is materials that do the job for the trial period, but don't break the bank or require complex installation. Quick and easy.
So it all sounds incredibly positive, but are there times when tactical urbanism just isn't the right move? Or maybe the timing isn't right?
Absolutely, and the guidebook is clear about this. Timing is really important. For example, it strongly advises avoiding the monsoon season.
Makes sense. Rain would mess things up.
Exactly. It hinders the actual work, and it also makes it hard to judge the user experience fairly if everyone's just trying to stay dry. Similarly, you should try to avoid doing it during big festivals or major local events. Why is that? Because those events bring unusual crowds and activity patterns. Your evaluation results would be skewed. They wouldn't reflect the normal, everyday use of the street. The same goes for election campaign periods. Streets get used differently then, too.
So you want normal conditions.
Precisely. The ideal is to implement and evaluate during a typical period, so you're responding to and measuring the impact on everyday life and movement.
Okay, that's a crucial practical point. So to kind of wrap up our deep dive here, what are the main takeaways from this Tactical Urbanism guidebook?
I think the core idea is using these low-cost temporary changes as a smart way to test and learn before you commit to big permanent changes in cities. It's very data-driven, starting with that deep side analysis to really understand the context and what people need.
And the collaboration aspect seems huge.
Absolutely. It's fundamentally collaborative, bringing citizens, businesses, and government together. It builds support, tackles problems flexibly, and it's ultimately about experimenting to create more people-focused urban spaces. It's a learning process.
And for you listening in, hoping to get up to speed quickly on these kinds of urban innovations, tactical urbanism is just a really fascinating practical example of how cities are trying to evolve. It's one of those moments where you see how even small temporary actions, when done thoughtfully and based on real evidence, can actually lead to quite significant positive changes in our streets and neighborhoods.
Exactly right. It provides a structured yet adaptable way to handle the complexity of urban life and gives communities a real voice in shaping their own environment.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on. Given how relatively low cost and collaborative tactical urbanism can be, what small temporary change do you think could make the biggest positive difference on a street or maybe a public square in your own neighborhood? And who would you need to talk to get involved, to even float that idea? Maybe take a fresh look around next time you're out with a critical eye, yes, but also a hopeful one. You might spot the perfect place for a little tactical urbanism yourself.